The train station was alive with endless noise, a restless heartbeat that never stopped. Vendors called out, travelers hurried past, and announcements echoed from the loudspeakers above. Luggage wheels rattled across the concrete floor, while trains screeched and hissed as they arrived and departed. Yet, in the middle of this constant motion, there was one figure who never moved. A small brown dog sat quietly near platform 3, his head tilted slightly, his eyes fixed firmly on the tracks. He was not like the other strays that wandered restlessly from place to place in search of scraps. He did not beg for food or chase after strangers. Instead, he waited day after day, night after night, in the same spot where the memory of his master had last been alive. Travelers often noticed him, some tossing bits of bread or water his way, others stopping for a moment, touched by his calm patience. But few understood the depth of what they were witnessing. For this was no ordinary dog, and this was no ordinary waiting. His story was one of faith, devotion, and an unshakable promise, one that began long before he became the silent guardian of Platform 3. Long before the station became his home, the dog had been a tiny puppy, fragile and full of life. He was found by a young man who was lonely and struggling to build a life for himself. The moment the man picked him up, something changed. Two souls found each other in their emptiness, and together they became whole. From that day forward, the boy and the dog were inseparable. The puppy would wait outside the man's door, tail wagging the moment footsteps echoed in the hallway. They walked through fields, shared meals, and curled up together on cold nights. The man spoke to him as though he were human, and the dog listened as if he understood every word. Their bond was simple yet sacred, a companionship that needed no explanation. Years passed and they grew older side by side. When the man was sad, the dog licked his tears away. When the man laughed, the dog barked and spun in circles of joy. Then came the day when life demanded a journey. The man packed a small bag and told his dog he would return soon. Together they walked to the station. The dog's paws padded along the pavement as he followed his master to the train. At the platform, the man stroked his head gently and whispered, "Wait for me, I'll be back." And with those words, he boarded the train, waving from the window as the whistle blew and the engine pulled him away. The dog sat there, watching the train disappear, tail wagging faintly, as if he believed that his master's promise was as certain as the rising sun. The first day passed quickly, the dog sitting patiently on the platform, his eyes fixed on the tracks. Every train that arrived made him stand, tail wagging, ears perked, scanning the faces of the passengers. But each time the crowd thinned, and his master was not among them. When the sun set and the sky turned dark, the dog curled up on the cold floor, resting his head on his paws. By morning he was still there, waiting with fresh hope. Days turned into weeks, but his routine never changed. Whenever a train approached, he would jump to his feet, searching every doorway, every window, convinced that his master would appear. Vendors began to notice him and offered him scraps of bread, bowls of water, or pieces of meat. Children petted him and laughed when his tail wagged softly at their touch. Some passengers smiled, thinking he was simply a stray who liked the station. Others shook their heads, whispering, "Poor dog, he doesn't know." Still, no matter what anyone thought, the dog remained. He did not wander to other parts of town. He did not search for another home. His place was here, on Platform 3, because this was where he had last seen his master. And as far as he was concerned, this was where he would see him again. The months slipped into years, and the dog became a permanent part of the station's story. Spring came with flowers blooming along the tracks, and he sat surrounded by blossoms. Summer followed with blistering heat, the pavement hot beneath his paws, yet he stayed in his place. Autumn brought falling leaves, swirling around him in golden storms, and still he did not leave. Winter covered the ground in frost and snow, but the dog endured the cold, curling into himself at night, his eyes never straying far from the tracks. His once bright fur grew rough, his body thinner, his muzzle grey, but his spirit never dimmed. People began to recognize him, calling him the station dog, and travelers told his story to others. They admired him, pitied him, fed him, and even offered to take him home, but he always found his way back to Platform 3. It was as though his heart was chained to that spot, bound not by force but by love. Families reunited in front of him, lovers embraced, children laughed as they were lifted off trains. But he sat quietly through it all, waiting for the one face he longed to see. His devotion became a living legend, a symbol of loyalty stronger than time itself. And though no train ever brought back his master, the dog never lost hope. Every whistle, every screech of brakes, every opening door was another chance for his heart to leap with expectation. One day, an old man recognized the dog and told the station workers the truth. Years ago, he said, he had seen the dog with his master on the platform. The man had left on a train, smiling as he promised to return. But fate had other plans. The man had died in an accident far from home, never making it back to the station. The dog, however, had never known. All he remembered was the promise. "I'll be back." The station fell silent at the revelation, hearts breaking for the loyal creature who had waited for someone who would never come. From that day on, the people of the town cared for him more deliberately. Vendors made sure he had food and water every day. Travelers left small offerings beside him, blankets in winter, gentle pats in the summer heat. Children grew up hearing his story, their parents pointing and saying, "That is what true loyalty looks like." Word of the faithful dog spread beyond the town, appearing in newspapers and stories shared far and wide. But for the dog, none of it mattered. He didn't understand fame or pity. All he understood was love, and all he could do was wait. And so he remained in his spot, his eyes scanning each train, believing in a promise that time itself could not erase. Age weighed heavily on the faithful dog, but his routine never changed. His fur was rough, his steps slow, his breathing heavy, yet every morning he limped back to Platform 3. His once sharp eyes were clouded with age, but they still brightened whenever a train pulled in. People watched him with tears in their eyes, knowing his body was failing, but his spirit remained as strong as ever. He no longer leapt to his feet when the whistle blew. Now he lifted his head slowly, ears twitching, tail wagging faintly, still searching every face that passed. Some travelers tried again to take him home, fearing he would not survive another winter in the cold. But each time he escaped, always returning to the tracks. This was not just waiting anymore, it was his life's mission, his final duty. The dog had built his existence around a promise he could not forget, a love that had carved itself into his soul. His world had shrunk to a single place, but that place held all the meaning he needed. Though time had taken his strength, it could not take his loyalty. And so, even as his body grew frail, his heart remained as unshakable as the day he first sat down to wait. One cold winter evening, as snowflakes drifted softly down and the lights of the station flickered against the darkness, the faithful dog lay quietly on his usual spot. His breaths came shallow, uneven, each one a fragile whisper against the stillness of the night. His body was weak, his fur thin from years of waiting in the open, yet his eyes remained steady, fixed on the tracks where his master had once departed. The lamplight glimmered faintly across those eyes, carrying the glow of a hope that even age and exhaustion could not extinguish. People gathered slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, their hearts heavy as they realized they were witnessing the end of something extraordinary. Vendors who had fed him for years stood silently nearby, their baskets empty, but their eyes full of sorrow. Children who had once played with him, now grown taller, stood quietly, remembering how he had always wagged his tail at their laughter. The cold air carried a hush, as though the station itself was holding its breath. Then, as the last train of the night pulled into the platform with a screech and a roar, the dog lifted his head one final time. His ears twitched, and for a fleeting, almost magical moment, his eyes brightened with the spark of youth, as though he truly saw his master stepping down from the carriage at last. His frail tail wagged once, slow but full of certainty, before his head lowered gently onto his paws. Surrounded not by family but by strangers who had come to love him as their own, the loyal dog closed his eyes and drifted into eternal sleep. No train had brought back his master, but he had kept his promise until his very last breath. And in that silence, broken only by the fading rumble of the train, it felt as though the station itself had bowed in mourning. The town did not forget him, for his story had carved itself into the hearts of all who had witnessed it. At Platform 3, the very place where he had spent his life waiting, they built a bronze statue in his memory. The statue captured him as he had always been, seated upright, eyes forever fixed on the tracks, watching for the one who never came. Travelers who passed through the station stopped to place flowers at its base, their petals bright against the cold metal. Children reached out to pat the statue's head, just as they once had with the real dog, their parents telling them the story of the faithful companion who had waited until the end. Families spoke of him around dinner tables, newspapers carried his tale far beyond the town, and soon his devotion became known across the world. Translated into countless languages, the story reached people in distant countries, touching hearts in places he had never seen. To some, he was simply a stray who had lost his way, but to millions, he became a symbol of what love truly means. Platform 3 was no longer seen as just a place for arrivals and departures. It became a place of memory, where loyalty was immortalized in bronze and in spirit. The people of the town visited often, not with pity, but with pride, grateful to have lived alongside a creature who embodied the purest form of devotion. Though he had left the world quietly, his spirit lived on in every tear shed, every smile softened, and every story retold in his honor. He had waited faithfully, never questioning, never wavering, and in doing so he taught humanity what it means to love beyond self, beyond reason, and beyond time. His legacy became eternal, etched not just in a statue, but in the hearts of all who believe in love that never ends. True love is not measured by time, distance, or reward, but by the strength of loyalty that never fades. It is the kind of love that waits, even when hope seems lost, even when the world says it is foolish. The abandoned dog at the station did not remain because he wanted recognition or sympathy. He stayed because his heart had already given itself completely to one person. To him, love was not a choice but a truth, a promise carved so deeply that it became his reason to live. His patience was not weakness but devotion, an unshakable faith in the bond he had once known. In every train whistle and every passing face, he believed in the return of the one who had promised to come back. His story teaches us that real devotion is not about receiving, but about giving without end, about remaining steady when everything else changes. In a world that often measures love by convenience, his life was a reminder that the purest kind of love asks for nothing but presence. The dog never spoke a word, yet his silence shouted louder than any language, showing that loyalty can be more powerful than even hope. He proved that the truest hearts are not always human, for sometimes animals carry lessons that people forget. His vigil was not just about waiting. It was about keeping love alive even when love could no longer be returned. In that he became more than a dog. He became a mirror of what humanity should strive to be. His legacy whispers to us that love is not about how long it lasts, but how deeply it is lived. And if we learn from him, perhaps we can also love with patience, with faith, and with loyalty that never ends.